Still with Morning Live. Thanks for being with us this morning. Now, Eskom has started an auction process to make the land surrounding its power stations in Mpumalanga available to private investors for renewable energy generation. Now, the government says that the 36,000 hectares of Eskom-owned land will be available for lease in a competitive bidding process, and that it will be offered to the private sector for purposes of generating electricity. And this means that private sector companies can now develop their own power generation plants for own consumption or for sale to third parties. NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola joins us now for more on this. Phakamile, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good afternoon, good morning, Sakina, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you for having me on your show.
So obviously this particular decision is likely to generate mixed reaction and even a possible backlash. But what is your reaction to this particular announcement?
As NUMSA, we have noted the announcement that land has been, according to the Department of Public Enterprises, they have allocated land for the use of private sector companies who want to be involved in the renewable energy program that Eskom has, or that government has rolled out, the REIPP program. And we have a few concerns on this issue. The first thing that we can say is that to us, it's confirmation of what we've said many times before, which is that what we are seeing is the privatization of Eskom, where government is enabling the private sector to basically hollow out this institution through allowing the private sector to get involved with the provision of energy generation. Secondly, when it comes to this question of government's renewable energy program, one of the things that we keep asking is whether the decisions that they've taken are actually in line with the principles of a just transition, which are the principles that we have to follow as we transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Our biggest concern about government's renewable energy program, the one that is being rolled out through the REIPPs, is that we feel it does not actually reflect the principles of a just transition. All of these changes that are being communicated about our move to renewables is a process where we as Labour, we feel that we have not really been allowed to drive this process, which is what is defined in the Just Transition documents. We feel that the renewable energy program does not benefit communities, does not benefit workers the way that is envisioned in terms of the principles of just transition. We are deeply concerned that at the end of this process, we are going to see even more job losses in Mpumalanga, because it's still not clear at this stage what and how they are going to replace those coal jobs that are going to be lost. So really for us, a lot of issues and a lot of questions that still remain unanswered.
And speaking of, I was hoping to get some clarity in terms of what you know as Labour at this point about the actual land that will be utilised, and also specifics around the terms and conditions of the use of that land. Are you clear on those?
Unfortunately, we're not. Nothing of what government is announcing in relation to Eskom, the changes that are taking place, is being consulted with us as Labour. We find out a lot of things through the media. Even the announcement on this agreement that government has made with certain countries in terms of the funding that's been allocated for just transition. Again, we found out through the media. Our problem is that government makes announcements. We are told that these are going to benefit communities, except there's no consultation. So we cannot confirm if indeed that's true. But so much of what is being done does not in any way reflect what we expect in terms of a just transition. And that's very worrying, particularly the issue of a lack of a social plan for Mpumalanga. In terms of what the CSIR found about this process, they predicted that the transition from renewable from fossil fuel to renewable, the closure of those coal-fired power stations would result in job losses of at least 100,000 people because of the fact that in Mpumalanga, there's so much dependence on coal companies and the industries that exist as a result of those coal companies. The disruption in that value chain would be devastating for that particular province. And this is why for us, it is very important that before these things can be rolled out, a comprehensive plan has to be unveiled, a socio-economic plan that speaks about those areas that are going to be affected, those businesses that are going to be disrupted, and how those jobs will, or the plans that are coming in place will be used to replace those jobs. That is crucial, given the fact that we are a country that has almost 50% expanded unemployment. This is not an issue that we can afford to ignore. What are we going to do to replace the coal jobs that are going to be lost? That is not a small issue. That's a major issue that still does not have an answer. And we are very concerned about the implications of what that will mean.
Conflicting messages, and this is bound to conflict the South African public, because you saying these job losses, you've not been consulted. There isn't a clear plan as to how these jobs will be saved or even absorbed in new sectors. But you look at Business Leadership South Africa as an example, Phakamile. They say Eskom obviously needs to retire the aged coal-fired generation plants and transform the land. And as we said, the private sector will now have the opportunity to bid for leases of this particular land. But in terms of the job situation, they say that this will actually save jobs when the private sector gets into that renewable energy space and those plants on this land. You saying you don't know that this will happen. So what should South Africans make of this?
This is part of the problem, Sakina, because we're not being taken on board, because the principles of just transition are being violated. There's no genuine consultation that's taken place in a meaningful way with Labour as we unpack this issue and roll out this program. And that is actually at the heart of the success of just transition. It will not work if the majority of people being workers, being the communities that are going to be affected, if they are not the ones who are driving the program, then in our view, we don't see how this can work, particularly because there has not been much transparency, certainly from government, about how they're rolling this out. There's a lot of statements that they release in the media about their intentions, but we have yet to see detailed plans that reflect the things that they claim are achievable. We're not surprised that Business Leadership South Africa would support this. They have always supported the idea of the private sector having a greater involvement in energy generation. As NUMSA, we've always been opposed to this. The reason we are opposed is because the private sector has no mandate for ensuring or guaranteeing affordable electricity, first of all, and for ensuring that the majority of South Africans are electrified. That is the mandate of the state. The state has to have that mandate. Eskom is supposed to carry that mandate of electrification of the entire country and guaranteeing regular, affordable electricity. But once you involve private sector, whose mandate is profiteering, then you can just know that that agenda can be tossed out the window. And we're already starting to see this when you look at the attitude that was reflected by the Joburg mayor in response to the Diepkloof protests. It was quite disgraceful, quite frankly, where her attitude was so dismissive to the genuine issues raised by members of the community about issues of affordability. We can't ignore that as a South African society. The majority of our people are not working. So when we say that they must pay for electricity, you're paying for electricity, but you're not working, how is that supposed to work? When you are denied electricity, it has a direct impact on your developmental capability. Any child who has gone to a school or has lived in a community where that child was denied electricity, that child is at a disadvantage to other children who have grown up in a scenario where they've had access to electricity. The job of this government is to deal with that imbalance. And we do not see how they'll be able to do that when they involve the private sector.
And as we just digress slightly there to the point that you've just made, because in terms of access to electricity, to be fair to the mayor of Johannesburg, what she also said was that those who cannot afford electricity should obviously then go through the necessary means tests and apply for indigency so that they could be exempt. Is that not fair? Or is this a situation whereby, as South Africans, those who can pay should continue to subsidize those who can't indefinitely, even though we know, Phakamile, that in certain instances people simply don't pay because they can get away with it because they live in an area that perhaps has more people who are unemployed?
We obviously, as NUMSA, acknowledge the challenge of this the great debt that Eskom has. And Eskom's debt is contributed by various things. There's the debt that's in relation to the disastrous build project, as you know, Sakina, where there were millions of rand in cost overruns in the building of some of these power stations, and Eskom still has to settle the debt that's in relation to that. There's debts that have come as a result or part of the issues that Eskom has to deal with is also the fact that it pays very exorbitantly for coal. And this is an area which Eskom, in our view, has not effectively intervened in. The same when it comes to REIPPs. Certainly for bid windows 1 to 4, the costs that Eskom is paying for primary energy are extremely high. And this is part of the reason, these are part of the things that have had an impact on Eskom's overall financial stability. As NUMSA, we have said consistently that government needed to intervene on those issues in a very direct way, and they failed. And yet we see them intervening so directly in turning off the lights for ordinary community members, but not intervening on the really burning issue of exorbitant coal prices, exorbitant REIP costs for bid 1 to 4, and there was absolutely no intervention from the state. So we do feel that there really has to be a balanced approach on this. It's very clear to us that our government is definitely pro-business, certainly in this decision that is taken to allow the business sector to exploit this opportunity of energy generation, where they are going to be even allowed to produce energy up to the level of 100 megawatts. They're effectively making Eskom redundant for the benefit of the private sector. And as a country, we are going to pay a very, very high cost for this. Electricity is a public good. Electricity on the whole should be provided by government in order to guarantee that everybody can access electricity. And once you allow the private sector to take a big chunk of that, you are actually undermining that agenda.
And just very briefly, we are out of time. Eskom's interim results, what did you make of that as NUMSA?
Well, we have noted that they've reported a 9.2 billion rand interim profit for the last 6 months, but they are still expected to incur a 9.1 billion rand loss. So clearly Eskom is not out of the woods yet. Some of the issues that I mentioned, particularly around the rising primary energy costs, are areas that need urgent intervention. And until they do so, we are not going to see radical changes. We continue to be opposed to the idea of breaking Eskom up into 3 parts. We do not feel that that's going to go anywhere with regards to solving Eskom's overall problems. But we do believe very strongly that until we deal with this issue of ensuring that the majority of people can access electricity, we are going to suffer as a country to deal with our socioeconomic problems.
Phakamile, thanks so much for your time this morning. NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola reacting to the decision by government to lease Eskom surrounding land. This is land surrounding its power stations in Mpumalanga to the private sector for private investors to actually produce renewable energy on that land. So always want to hear your views, and obviously we'll pick up on this again at a later stage and also talk about that point that Phakamile makes about Eskom paying too much for coal, as an example. So all of that we'll pick up at a later stage. Let's take